Yeah, I do have a cold and fighting it off. That's why my voice is cracked. So if I say anything and you don't catch it, don't feel bad about stopping me and asking me to clarify. So, like Joan said, you know, I've been working at marine fisheries for the last 11 years, just about. And I've been working on our fishery-dependent surveys. So those are fishery-independent, excuse me. Those are the surveys that we do that don't take data from fishing indirectly, so whether it's recreational or commercial. We do independent surveys to get an index of the population, sort of independent. So, I got into this field for a lot of reasons. I always loved the ocean. I grew up right on the ocean north of Boston. And you know, it really just amazes me. In particular, it's really kind of ironic that I ended up working on something like winter flounder, or on a survey that actually surveys that population of fish really well, because I grew up fishing for them right in Boston Harbor. And they used to be really, really large fishery. It's actually coming back in recent years because of declines in other species. There's been more effort on winter flounder, particularly recreationally up there. So being somebody that likes to fish and that likes science, this seemed like a great fit for me. I love being out in the field and doing field work, whether you know it's clean like that or getting covered in algae while you're trying to clean out a net after a big catch. You know, we see a lot of really neat stuff, even when we're not expecting to see marine mammals on the boat when we're doing our surveys, or you know, magnificent bottom fish like a wolffish. I'm just crazy about fish, to be completely honest. I did a lot of work at the New England Aquarium when I was a young kid. I worked in the husbandry department there, and I learned how to take care of a lot of these organisms in captive environment. And then I went on to go to college at Eastern University, and I did similar work to what I'm doing now, but only on coral reefs, and not with fish. I did some survey work with coral, which is ironically a little bit more similar than you would think to surveying fish populations. You're not scooping them up with a piece of fishing gear and then counting them and measuring them. Instead, you're actually visiting them at the same place year after year. So I worked with somebody that did that. And it's very similar work. So it's work that I've come to love. And I just want to mention quickly, this is Arnie Howe. I'm going to go over a lot of work that the Division of Marine Fisheries has done on winter flounder that's germane to the bay right out in front of us. So it just so happens that Waquoit served as a research site for a lot of the work that we do today, still on winter flounder. It was sort of a place where we were able to sample them really well, you know, during the spawning season, and then thereafter for juveniles in the summers. So my predecessors did an awful lot of work. Arnie in particular did, you know, over 35 years with the Division of Marine Fisheries, and he's responsible for a lot of what we're going to be looking at. And a lot of what we know today on how he managed the species. So he was sort of a groundbreaker. To move into their understanding when they began a lot of this work, you know, most of what was known about the winter flounder was life history, early life history particularly. So there was a lot of studies in the 60s that were just getting published on early life history, egg deposition, larval period, how long it takes for them to settle out of the plankton. And that's sort of very rudimentary work, understanding what's important to that species for juvenile habitat, and you know, that's sort of like the ground laying work. We didn't yet understand where sort of subpopulations that were isolated, reproductively isolated, were around Cape Cod and up and down the east coast of the United States. So at that point, there was no management, there were no trip limits, there was foreign fleets were still fishing in United States waters. We weren't getting an idea of how much was actually being taken in an accurate sense. So fishery science was sort of at its beginning in the United States, really, and we didn't really even have laws to govern any of the take that was going on. So we knew that there was problems. So this is an old slide that Arnie actually used, looking back at really, some segments of data from the mid-50s to the mid-60s. And this is a catch by state, but you could really just focus on the total and see how it, really it triples over the time period, over a decade. And, we're still not getting into the area of time where the foreign fleets were pushed out of, the United States waters with the Madison-Stevens Act of '75. So you're still 10 years away, and we're already ramping up our catch. And really what happened thereafter is when we had the Madison Act, we had a lot of people get into fishing in the United States that weren't currently into it. So our harvest actually went even higher at that point. So our local harvest was climbing when these predecessors of mine started this winter flounder research. It's going on almost 50 years ago. So they knew something had to be done. We needed more information on how to manage the species once we got a good handle on how many were being taken. So, like I said, it's an important commercial and recreational species. It's a medium-sized flatfish, so it's not one of the largest. Summer flounder or fluke, if you fish around here, you've seen them in the summertime probably. They get quite a bit larger than winter flounder. But still, this is pretty important food species, and it's most abundant really to New Jersey. To Delaware Bay is sort of the southernmost extent where they'd be found. There's publications out there that claim the southernmost range to Georgia. That would be like the shortest fishes in the Gulf of Maine has this very large range, and really they haven't been found south of Delaware Bay in any number, both commercial, recreational, or survey catches in the past 2 decades. So in the past 20 years, there's very few of them that are south of there. And partially what's at work is this population has been shrinking south of the Cape, and also it's been getting warmer in the Mid-Atlantic Bight, and this is a temperate fish that likes cooler temperatures. So this population is probably experiencing some thermal stress to a southern extent. There's probably no doubt about that. They just don't like it, and I'll show you more about how to know that. So this is a typical catch off our state trawl survey, which I work for now. And you can see that, all of these baskets, there's about 6, 7 of them. There's about 8 baskets out of this sort of 10, 12 baskets of catch that are all flatfish. And, a third of that is all winter flounder. So in state waters, winter flounder makes up a huge biomass for groundfish species we encounter, even to this day. So, beginning in the early 60s, population structure is unknown, and the best way we can get at that is through wide-scale tagging of fish. So, this is a winter flounder with a Peterson disc tag in its dorsal surface, and about 12,000 of these were tagged just in 1964 alone. And they had about a 30% return rate on the tags, which is really high for a tagging study. And to this date, within the past decade or two, tagging any marine species, I haven't seen success like that. And I think the reason for that is that, we'll get to it, this is a slide where all the tagging locations were. So where all these letters and numbers are, they shot for about 500 fish per area. So you can see they basically kind of tried to evenly tag throughout the coastline. They doubled up and did about 1,000 fish on Georges Bank. And then they waited to see what happened. And, you know, basically what this did is it delineated 3 populations. So the 3 populations that we have are the Gulf of Maine, which would be Cape Cod Bay, and north into the Bay of Fundy, down on about to Highland Light on the Cape, and then down around to the Great South Channel into the Mid-Atlantic Bight. That's another population. And then Georges Bank is that 3rd population. And there's limited immigration and emigration between those groups. So that's why, armed with this kind of information, you can get a better handle on how to manage a species, because then you know what if you collect the right kind of information from fishermen by area where they catch these fish, you can tell how many are coming out of that population as opposed to, you know, other areas, and then maybe manage each area appropriately. So that's sort of the idea behind getting this information to begin with. And then we moved on to doing sort of an inshore study. We wanted to look at, as an agency, places that a fish like winter flounder use for juvenile habitat, which is most of the inshore embayments, estuaries like Waquoit. And they would use these systems basically for the first growth season. So fish traditionally, and I know there's probably some people in the room that have either experienced it or heard about winter flounder fishing in the spring on Cape Cod from bridges and docks, and a lot of these embayments and estuaries, and that, you know, really that doesn't exist anymore. There aren't really many people who try it. I don't know how successful it would be either, because the population in the southern New England components of the Mid-Atlantic Bight's pretty low historically. So, you know, they come in the spring, well, really late winter, early spring. They start depositing eggs. The eggs are adhesive, so they are actually spawning eggs on the sediment or on algal surfaces, and they'll stick. And when temperature is really low, and that's why this species actually does this, they capitalize on that low water temperature and try to get their eggs out during, you know, times when the water temperature is below 50. Because when you reach 50 Fahrenheit, a lot of our invertebrate predators, egg predators like bay shrimp, crabs, there's even, you know, snails that'll feast upon the eggs. So a lot of these invertebrates become much more active, and their metabolisms are demanding them to eat. So this species sort of capitalizes on spawning when the crickets are chirping, when nobody's doing anything. You know, to get those eggs out there before anything happens, and before anybody's awake enough to come and eat them. And then they have a relatively short larval period. So they actually spend about 2 months at the longest in the water column. And while they're in the water column, they actually have an eye on each side of the head, and they swim, or they orient. I shouldn't say they do a lot of swimming, because they don't. They're carried around by the tide, and they do a vertical migration, just like a lot of our plankton do around this area. Is they'll come up at night and then go back down sort of close to the bottom during the daylight hours. And what happens is that eye migrates to one side right after or right around when they settle out onto the benthic substratum. So when they get onto the sediment and stay there, they're undergoing a huge sort of metamorphosis, and that's what they call it. It's metamorphosis of flounder. So basically, that takes about 2 months to 3 months to get onto the substrate. So by that time, in this area, you're talking right around now, late March to early April. And then thereafter, they start to grow, but they're still very slow. They're very slow to move. They're not fast swimmers. And they're even, I would say, they're not really a very mobile fish until after June. So they're pretty slow moving and vulnerable to a lot of predation up until that point. So when we studied Waquoit Bay, we did 17 other estuaries around the state as well. The Waquoit Bay and Mill Pond estuary, they found a lot of spawning fish in the system. And they did sampling on other things as well. These are on, not on our website, but they are available. We've been trying to get them out there. But they're very interesting. We call it the monograph series. So they're older reports, but they contain a lot of interesting information other than just the fish sampling that went on. So they did salt marsh characterization. They took aerial extents of salt marsh vegetation and species composition. There was contaminant sampling that went on for the biota and plants. And then there was also shellfish surveys that were done. So quite a bit of work, going on, and there was some water quality sampling as well. So, these estuarine studies, mainly, there were 17 of them, and Waquoit being one. They really reinforced our understanding of the importance of these systems to a fish like wing flounder. They need it for the first growth season. They need it for successful spawning, really. But not to say that there isn't some offshore coastal spawning, there is, but it seemed, at least south of Cape Cod, that the embayment populations were quite important to the whole population. And then we entered into a period sort of concurrently, but it was towards the end of the estuarine series, that we wanted to sort of prove the theory that, in this area, the estuaries were really the important place for this fish to conduct its spawning and then the end of the year growth and recruitment. So there were 4 projects that went on. The first one was to take the first research vessel that the division had, was this boat right here named the Wilbur. And they went out into Nantucket Sound and spent some time trawling, dragging for eggs with an egg sled, looking for juvenile fish with a beam trawl, which is a fine mesh trawl, and basically to sort of prove that there were no spawning fish during the spawning season inside of the embayments. So they did monthly sampling throughout the year to get at that. And then there was some other sort of smaller studies looking at what is the recruitment to the fishery from a system like Eel Pond, Waquoit Bay. So how many fish does this system produce to try to get at looking at what the contribution of the system this size is to the whole population as a whole. And then to look at further delineating those population units that we looked at, the 3 units, the Gulf of Maine, Southern New England, and Georges Bank, to see if there was a way to do that using something called meuristics, which meuristics is just a fancy word for counting structures on fish. So in this case, it's fin rays were counted. So these are the small separations that you see in the fin of the fish, and I have a picture of it to show you. And then we worked on developing a survey method to get at looking at those young of the year fish. And to see if we could get a recruitment survey going. So that first study in Nantucket Sound looking at eggs and spawning fish, the presence of eggs and ichthyoplankton, that's just fish plankton. So we actually did plankton toes both on the bottom and in the water column looking for larvae of winter flounder, as well as all the other species that were there. This was truly not just a winter flounder study, it was a multi-species study at the same time. But that was what was done, and on the Wilbur again. And this is just a picture of what an egg sled looks like. It's sort of like a plankton net mounted on a steel frame, and it has sort of a deflector plate to keep large rocks from tearing up the plankton net as they tow it over the bottom. So it's like a sled, and it has a sort of a rag type, I call it a rag, but you can see it has leads tied to it. This is kind of a, I'll call it an exciter. It's there to sort of churn up the bottom a little bit and get some of the eggs, because they are stuck to each other sometimes in pretty heavy clusters. So if you drag that over the bottom like that, you may actually have some roll into the net at a greater frequency. And then that is a larval winter flounder that was found in a plankton toe. So that's a very early larva. Probably only on the order of days to maybe a week or two old.
What time of year was that?
That would have been from, I think, March.
Mm-hmm.
I think they did some pretty good annotation of the slides that they had. I had to go through a couple of books to find out some of the specifics on some of this stuff, but it's an early season fish. And then this is the beam trawl that they used to look for juvenile flatfish. So this would be anything available later in June through the summer. And what they actually found is they really found that there weren't that many eggs out in Nantucket Sound. And they told where all those numbers are on the figure of Nantucket Sound were the fixed stations that they sampled, and they were quite a distance away from the Nantucket Sound shoreline of the Cape, where all the estuaries are. And they found very low numbers of eggs, very low numbers of plankton larvae, for winter flounder at least. They did have other species. And in the beam trawl tows, they did 102 of those tows. And they only got winter flounder juveniles in 9 of them. And that's a really low rate of catch when you consider if you were to do the same thing with the same piece of equipment inside the Point Bay, even today. I'd be surprised if you didn't catch one in every tow that you put that piece of gear into the water right now, this year, come June. So there's still quite a few of them out there. Whether they're making it or not, that's another question. But just to show that this piece of equipment actually did work, this is a catch. And this is a very similar species. This is a window pane flounder, these little white diamond-shaped guys right here, they're really neat. And they actually utilize places like the shoals in the Sound as young of the year fish. So they sort of fill a different niche. And they're also not spawned the same way. They're spawned more throughout the year, and that species does a broadcast spawn of eggs into the water column. They're not adhesive.
Would you use a much smaller piece of gear if you were in a bay like this?
Yeah, that's a 2 meter, so about 6 feet wide. You probably want to use like a 1 meter. I've done 1 meter beam trawls inside estuaries, and they're very manageable. Often, 18 to 20 foot boat with a culling table. It's actually a great piece of equipment. It's probably one of the oldest pieces of equipment for sampling juvenile flatfish in the world. They've been doing it in Europe with beam trawls like that for over 125 years. So it's a very well proven method. And then we move on to this assessment of tagging that happened, or the assessment of the recruitment to the actual population. So the component of all the fish that spawn in here, how many actually contribute to the fishery. And not to get too far into details, they tagged about 1,300 fish just right in this estuary alone. And these are the recapture maps that happened for the year afterwards. So this was around 1970. And this is April through June, July through September, October, December, and then January through March. And most of your recaptures happen within the first, 6 months or so from release. So these were fish that were actually tagged here in spawning condition inside the bay with those Peterson disc tags, about 1,300 of them. They were liberated. There was a prize of $1 for a tag return and $2 for a tag with the fish. With a whole fish. So there was a little placard right there they hung up around the Cape and around commercial fishing, docks and whatnot. So, and that's a picture of the tagging work being done. They did this with a skiff trawl right in the estuary there, and I have a picture of it. But this shows sort of the progression of the migration, of the annual migration of the fish too. It's well understood now. This isn't the only work that sort of supports it, but you see that, they're inside the estuary, obviously, to begin with in March, in March and April is when all of the releases occur. And, they move out to the Sound as the water warms up in here, and then they move out east of the Cape where there's cooler water during the summer because, again, like I said, this is more of a temperate fish, so they don't like it when the temperature's around 70 degrees, which, the Sound does get pretty warm, and it has for the measured past. And then, you know, come October, when things start to cool off again, you can see they start to trickle back in, and then they're sort of undetectable almost at the point of midwinter. And there's reasons for that. They do come in and feed heavy, and they develop their gonad to prepare for spawning, and then they sort of slow down because everything's, you know, there's not as much food around. They do bury in the sediment, and their movements are much less. There's a lot of acoustic tagging data that's been done recently that proves that this happens. They think sometimes with these acoustic tags, they put a tag on a fish and it's transmitting a signal, essentially, and the receiver is just listening for that individual fish. So the fish moves around and then buries below the substrate, and the tag gets buried. And people that do this research recently have thought that, oh, we've lost the fish, he's dead. And then all of a sudden, a month later, it shows up again. And, you know, that's the kind of thing that's a problem using that technology on a fish like flounder, is that you're not going to see exactly where they are 100% of the time. So, that is what they use to tow the tiny net. And they caught 1,300 fish just right in this system over about 4 sampling events. So that's pretty amazing to me. I don't know if you'd be able to do that again, just with the level of the population right now. And then this is just a shot of what happens to the Peterson disc tag. This is probably a fish that was at liberty for over a year. And the tag basically migrated from where they tag it right here on the dorsal surface. It's migrating its way as the fish grows right out the fin. Eventually this will fall right out as the fish gets bigger. And that's a picture of them tagging right on the shoreline over here on Washburn Island. They just used to bring a table with them in another boat, set it up on the shoreline, and they used to have live cows for the fish that they caught in the trawl, and they would take them out as they had an opportunity to tag them. The tagging is actually pretty fast, and it's a stainless steel pin that goes through the fish. And it's a technology, a tagging technology that's still utilized today. It's a fairly benign form and a very good form for retention of the tag. They don't fall out. It's a very good method. So then the heuristics. This is counting characters on a fish to separate the population. So we have a lot of cool genetic techniques that people use today to go along with studies like this, but we're still doing this kind of work today in fishery science because it is a faster way to process samples, to get more samples. And sometimes the genetic work, although now it's a lot cheaper than it was even when I was in college, so they can process quite a few of those samples. But what they did is they took 19 estuaries, sampled 100 fish, they seamed up 100 young of the year fish, and they counted over 5,000 fin rate pairs, so about 10,000 individual counts on these little tiny fish. It was an awful lot of work to go through doing that. But in the result, they found that the fish north of the Cape was significantly different based on the dorsal fin ray counts and the anal fin ray counts. So these are all the rays right here, all these little striations in the fin. And then there was another population that had some separation from Martha's Vineyard. So right now we don't manage that as a separate population. It's not managed as a separate population, but it even had some uniqueness just based on this one look, which is pretty neat. And then, you know, at the same time, other people were doing this, and, you know, the idea that these individual estuaries had importance to the sort of the whole population was really starting to gain acceptance with the understanding of early life history and the fact that these systems are very important to the juvenile fish for the first season. And this is just a picture of seine with that's about a 21-foot seine. And it's a really easy way to gather these fish. You may only have to pull that net certainly less than 60 yards, and you can get 100 fish samples. So there's a lot of fish in water that, you know, is only knee-deep, and that's how I still survey them right here. And that's a picture of me doing the same type of thing. You can see there's quite a few little winter flounder. These are the blind side and the white side of the flounder. in the catch right there, and that's right from Waquoit Bay. This is on the other side of Washburn Island, right in Beal Pond. And this was the fourth goal that they had in the Nantucket Sound Studies, is to come up with a way to survey juvenile fish, particularly juvenile winter flounder. So they did some smaller beam trawls, some smaller skiff trawls that had liners in them so that the mesh was small enough to retain these fish. They did tows both with seams and those other two pieces of gear, both near the shore and further away from the shore, all throughout the summer, to try to target when it is that you could return to an area and sample it most consistently, because that's the most important thing when you do fisheries survey work, or any kind of survey work, where you're trying to work an index on anything, you know, to see what the health of the population is. You have to do it the same way every year. And that they came up with basically the same was a really good way of doing it. And sticking to the early part of the growth season, so from mid-June to early July, was the right time of year to be going after the fish. So we have more information. You know, we basically driven home that the stock delineations, those individual population sort of reproductively isolated subunits were whole with this work, and the spawning habitat was well understood. And then we had a better fine-scale understanding of juvenile habitat and the use of that habitat inside these systems throughout that summer period, And then we came to a need for population monitoring, not just of winter flounder, but of all of the different finfish species in state waters. And that's where we came up with the trawl survey. So this is the deck of the research vessel Gloria Michelle. We currently use twice a year in May and September to do a bottom trawl survey with a larger otter trawl. And this is just a picture of one of our sampling tables. So what we currently do is, you can see there's like a strip of silver white in the middle of that tabletop. That's actually a measuring board. You use a small magnet in your hand, and you slide the nose of the fish right up to the end here, and all you have to do is just place the magnet on that sensor, and that collects that fish's length as part of the catch. We have small scales that are motion compensated to take individual weights on the species that we do maturity observations on. We take age and growth samples from a large component of the catch, and that's used to model the population, see how old the fish are and how many there are at that age. Those proportions can be applied to the whole catch. So we do a lot of work, and this sort of electronic arrangement only started in 2010. We used to do this all on paper, and I would lose my voice every day yelling out the lengths of the fish as somebody was taking stroke tallies. So it was a great thing to go to this technology, and I'm really happy that I was a part of it.
What do you use for age? Do you scales?
Scales on some species. Really right now, we're moving almost all towards otoliths. So that's an ear bone inside the fish's skull, on the ventral side of the skull cavity. These are sort of like a statolith. They're not used in hearing per se in the fish, but they're analogous to some of our structures in that part of our skull. So that's best sort of the way to describe it. And they use in orientation, so they're sort of floating in a jelly-filled sac. So you have to sort of bisect the skull, take the otolith out. And the otoliths have annular rings, just like all of our trees do around here. So when growth slows down towards the end of the growth season, all of these daily rings pile up on top of each other and make one solid mark. So if you've ever seen a cross-section of a tree, you'll understand exactly what we're doing to age these fish. And scales have the same attribute. They have annual marks. Although scales can be difficult because they fall off. So through potential predator-prey interactions that happen with fish or just living, sometimes they're shed. So you can get regenerated scales that don't have the whole timeline on them. And also they tend to get hard to read at the edges. So it's going towards the otoliths now. And that's just a picture of the 3 workstations. So that first one was the one there on the end. You see the 2 biologists I'm working out there. And we have another 2 stations on the deck of the boat. So it allows us to really get through a lot of different catch components quickly. To date, we've done over 7,000 individual samples in state waters. All of these little black lines are representative of the place that we've put the net down and not a successful station samples. And you know, we take information on a lot of the things that we encounter, not just the finfish and invertebrates in the survey. This yellow mass amongst all these dogfish that you see in the net. Thanks, Chris. Those yellow masses are big sponge, and that's really common in Cape Cod Bay. And up here, this looks like a shag carpet. That's an introduced algae, is Heterosiphonia japonica. So we sometimes will plug the net, and we have to clean it because obviously that affects the performance of the fishing gear. But we take volumetric estimates of all life that we come across, whether it's plant or animal. If it doesn't walk, we don't just totally ignore it. So we have a separate database that we keep all this information into because admittedly it's very important because it serves as habitat for a lot of different things. And it also, unfortunately, can be invasive or problematic, and it's something we really like to care, observe, and record. So we have separated state waters into 5 regions, and mostly that's just to separate the strata that we sample so that it's appropriate and we can withdraw that data for each stock unit for each fish. So there's a lot of fish that we sample, like the winter flounder, that have separate subunits, discrete subunits for reproductive purposes in one area, like the Gulf of Maine, and then everything south of the Cape. So this just helps us, once we have everything in the database, draw it down the right way, get the data that we want for the species in the stock unit that we're interested in, and then we separate state waters by depth strata, because you do get a different assemblage with increasing depth and regional location. So there's a lot of species that we'll see up off of Cape Ann, for instance, that you won't see in Nantucket. And in this survey since 1978, the gear has remained unchanged, and we've had the same vessel since 1982. So it's a long standing survey, and our vessel just got, thankfully, got a whole bunch of reunits, new rebuilt engine, new transmission, new head. They did more work to it than they've ever done, which is really very good because we'd like to keep doing this as long as we possibly can. It's a very valuable survey. It's one of the longest, if not, well, depends on how you want to count it. It's probably, you want to say it's the longest trawl survey that we have on the whole east coast of the United States. That's remained unchanged and consistent. So it's something to be proud of and keep doing because it's a great project. And like I said, we separate everything by species. We first take an aggregate weight. We measure either all of them by species or take a subsample if there are too many. And we also do all those maturity observations, which I haven't really gone into too much yet. But what that basically entails is ascertaining the maturity of those fish, and you tell whether or not they're, you can't, on the outward sense, for most fish, tell if they're male or female unless you cut them open. And then we also take macroscopic looks at the gonad to see what stage of development it's at. So that sort of informs when they spawn, where might be really important for them to do that. So there's a lot of information gained from that. And then this is just to show again, you know, that southern New England population, based on the tagging data, is limited to regions 1, 2, and 3. So we're going to look at what has happened with winter flounder over time. So this is data from the trawl survey. We have spring on the left, fall, spring biomass, I should say, on the left. So this is the weight, catch weight of winter flounder. And then the abundance. So you can see that we had 2014 was a record low that we've seen for the population and biomass. And it was a near record low for abundance as well. And over time, the percent occurrence that we encounter them, so this is the number of toes in which we encounter them in those three regions, has really gone down. So the first decade was steadily in the 95% occurrence area, and then we started dipping down. Now we're down, sometimes, below 60 or around 62%. So we're catching a lot less of them, and there are a lot less of them spread out throughout that area. So not the greatest news for that species. And then this is a length frequency histogram.
When you were doing the samples on the fish, and you did like the detailed analysis, you had to kill the fish. Did you only do that on a small number of them and release most of them?
And commonly that is done that way for this species in particular, for winter flounder. We do take more information on a few other species like yellowtail flounder and summer flounder, and a lot of those do get sacrificed, but the catch amount is a lot less. So the overall sort of dent in population that you're making doing this work is quite a bit less. If we cut every one of these open, we literally could kill thousands of fish. It would be a lot. And they're actually one of the more resilient animals that we catch. So they actually last through a sampling event. And I think we pointed out, but we do have water plumbed onto all of our tables. So, and there's sort of a recessed channel in the back of those tables in front of that length measurement board. So usually what we're doing is we're putting them up there and running water over them the whole time. A lot of them actually sit right in the water. They start breathing right again right in front of you. Sometimes it can be a little messy. They flop around a lot. They wake up. But it's good, and it's something we've improved. We didn't do that even 10 years ago, 11 years ago when I started working on this project. They didn't have water for the first few years I worked here, plumbed up onto the tabletop. But it's great because it does save a lot of really distance we catch. It'll actually sustain them through waiting for us to measure them all. And of course, larger catches are more problematic like that, which occasionally we will get a very large catch. But this is a length frequency histogram to show you what's happening size-wise in the population. So you have length in centimeters from 0 to 60. We usually don't see 60 centimeter winter flounder, that's very large, but 45 to 50, we used to see a lot more in that size bracket back at the beginning of the time series. And you can see the population's kind of done, a little decrease to a low point, and then there was some glimmer of hope, in the mid-90s to almost 2000. And then since then, it's sort of been on a one-way trip, again, below the median catch during the time period. 2010 is an interesting point because we did see some recruits come in. Those are like age 1 fish. And they didn't really last. We didn't see them past that year. It could be predation of other species. We have other flatfish species that actually feed heavily on winter flounder at even the age 1 size. Summer flounder, fluke, will feed pretty heavily on and even at that size. So there could be different things going on in the environment. Another thing to note is that happens to be the first year we had a moratorium on the commercial take for the stock, Southern New England, South Cape. So it could have been, we had a little bit of larger fish show up at the same time too. So I think you can kind of see the moratorium or the effect of the moratorium in the data. Not just our survey observed this. Rhode Island had the same observations as well as Connecticut, even as far south as New Jersey. So there were some larger fish that were saved because there was a moratorium for a short period, but then that moratorium was lifted about a year ago. So not a smart idea. I didn't agree with it.
So if by having a moratorium, there were more big fish and they ate all the little fish?
Well, that could be, they could be extinguished through predation. You know, we don't see them really making it. You know, the moratorium lasted for 3 years. So if they had made it, you'd really see a good sized spike, you know, going through as the years go on. And you don't see that in there. You don't see those recruits moving through the population. So I would assume that mortality is really high. And on a species like this, where it's undergoing some environmental stress and also predators are becoming more hyper-abundant, you would expect them really not to make it. And some flounder are a large predator. So are the sea robins. And we've seen some increase in sea robins as well, both here and to the south. They could do a number on them. So that's probably what's going on. And then of course we take bottom temperatures from the trawl surveys, and we've seen shifts. So this is the May survey, my spring survey. This is our fall survey. And you can see over time, we've had sort of a shift, particularly noticeable in the fall. The temperature seems to have been rising, you know, throughout the whole period from 1978 to 2014. Particularly in regions 1, 2, and 3, which comprise that southern region that we're talking about for winter flounder. So, you know, biologically significant, yes, particularly for something like winter flounder, because you're talking about going from, you know, this is about a, you know, 3 degree centigrade, so it's almost 10 degrees, you know, and this is over 10 degrees Fahrenheit. As well as this. So that's biologically significant, I think, for a fish, especially a fish that likes cool water. So I'm very realistic with this type of data. It's not a smoking gun for why they're disappearing. It's not the only reason why they might be disappearing. They're not coming back. But what it could be doing is it could be affecting our survey, unfortunately, because we try to do these things and keep them consistent, do them at the same time of year every year. And when you see something like this, it calls into question in your own mind as a professional doing this work, should we really be doing the survey, you know, at the beginning of September the way we have it? Do we move the ship? Now, the unfortunate thing about that is that there's really no way we can fix it, at least at this point in time. So this temperature data is very limited. This is what we see when we sample. We have no way of forecasting that. I know our climatological forecasting is really, really good now, you know, for the land. But in the ocean, we just lack data points. We lack the spatial extent of the data points and into the deep, too, where a lot of these fish go in the wintertime. So we don't really have a way of forecasting when the perfect time to go out would be. But, you know, that's sort of where I see the future of what we're doing going. I think that we're getting there now. The government is spending a lot of money at collecting that data, and it's sort of just beginning at this point in time. So I'm hopeful that before I get out of this and retire, I'll see some of that.
Do you see the same population decline in Cape Cod Bay?
It's a little more stable up there, although that has undergone a bit of a decline too. And unfortunately, right now, it's undergoing more stress from fishing. There's been an increase in the amount you're allowed to land in that area, mainly because the assessment is a not very strong assessment. So the modeling that's done from the population isn't very strong because there could be multiple problems with it. Essentially, it's either the catch data we have from the fishing industry is horribly terrible, or the survey isn't really measuring it well. And I really don't think that's it, because the survey does cover the spatial extent much better. Even our survey does north of the Cape rather than south of the Cape. And then you have the NIM survey that covers offshore ones. So they're seeing some of the same things we are. We're seeing fish actually in deeper water, in deeper, colder water north of the Cape and down here, which gets to this point of, you know, I doing the survey at the right time, because our southern strata are much shallower. We don't have the deep water available in state waters to do this work in. So I ask myself a lot of questions about it, and, you know, it's possible we're going to revamp what we're doing at some point, maybe not too distant future too.
Are you seeing any migration towards blue water in the Gulf of Maine?
Absolutely, yeah, and if I don't have the figures with me, but we have plots that we provide catch for strata, and you see for winter flounder, over time, the shallow strata show a declining trend, and the deeper strata show an increasing trend during the same survey. So it's definitely happening. It's even happening offshore in other surveys, like the new survey.
I wonder if you know, last summer we watched at the Chatham Fish Pier flounder being offloaded. Quite a lot of it seemed to be, and I had it in my head that they were winter flounder. Would that be correct? Do you know?
Possible, yeah. The Nantucket Shoals area, or the Great South Channel, just east of Chatham, a lot of flounder are harvested there by draggers. And there's tie-down gill netting that goes down out there too. That's a gill net that doesn't really have floats. It's got 2 lead lines. They pay it out behind the boat, sort of in a sheet, and it settles on the bottom. And then lobsters, crabs, and flounder that sort of stumble through it along the bottom are caught. So it could have been, there's not that many draggers that operate out of Chatham because of the shallow bar out there, so it might have been a gill net. But there are a lot of flounder in the channel. It's where almost all of the mid-Atlantic fish go. And so anything in New Jersey, Long Island, there are fish that will tolerate the warm water, but the larger part of the population doesn't really like it. And they all undergo this great exodus to the sort of Nantucket Shoals area because of that cool water coming down from north of the Cape. And it's a very lucrative area to go winter flounder fishing.
What's the northern extent of the winter flounder? How far does it go?
About Newfoundland. Yeah, there's plenty of them in Newfoundland. They don't really go too much further north along like the Labrador coastline. They mostly just sort of the northern extent of Newfoundland.
You said the population of Cape Cod Bay extends all the way. Is that based on heuristics?
That to the Bay of Fundy. There are separate populations throughout the Maritimes and then up to Newfoundland, so that's not, so sort of along the coast of Maine, right to the Bay of Fundy, and then out to the Hay line. Anything sort of inshore would be considered a Gulf of Maine.
Is that based on the heuristic studies, the tagging studies, or both?
Tagging, heuristics, and to this point, you know, the state of Maine, I actually worked on the state of Maine's trawl survey before I worked here, and there's actually a fun sort of way they catch flounder up there, or at least the way that the population is distributed along that coastline. There's a lot of fish sort of to the southern end, then there's a sort of nothing towards the middle, maybe Penobscot Bay area in Mount Desert, and then you start catching a lot more when you get to the Bay of Fundy. So it's possible that that delineation should be further south, but it's really never been looked at. Mainly because flounder fishing is traditionally a soft sediment thing, so the catches coming out of Maine have always been really low, except for southern Maine. There's a lot more softer bottom that they can trawl, because most of it is a trawl fishing, not a commercial. And then, just to show you what's been going on in the same survey real quick, I'll just go over it pretty fast. It's a decent effort. It takes about 10 days to do the whole thing. It happens around mid-June to early July every year. 49 stations are sampled, 3 replicate tows are done in each station, so it's about 150 hauls. And we do it around high tide, because at this point in the year, the small fish like to migrate into the intertidal to feed. So we use a fairly small seam to do it, and we have been deploying temperature monitors that record temperature throughout the annual cycle in each of the estuaries since 2006. And we're about to, I think, as an agency, expand that effort considerably, maybe even to the tune of, I think we're about to have about 70 temperature stations in various depths and locations around the state. And that's one of our temperature monitors. That's one of the ones that's deployed sort of on its own, incognito, hopefully. I have lost some, they do get tampered with occasionally. But haven't had a lot of data loss, thankfully. And I do have them on hard structures, bridges, piers, are much safer, things like this, because is just a picture of some of the things that we experienced besides the winter flounder. Interesting, that's a pinfish. This is asparagus, so this is like a scup. It's in the scup family. That little guy is most common in Florida, and we got one in Waquoit Bay 3 years ago. And then we caught, I think we got about 10 of them, and spread throughout 4 different estuaries 2 years ago. So we do get some oddballs. We also generate an index of abundance, and that's a juvenile summer flounder, so that's a tiny little fluke right there. They're really pretty. And then we encounter a whole bunch of other finfish. This is just a pup, smooth dogfish, real shy. And then one word out for habitat and the importance of protecting it. That soupy mess is the green algae that you see floating around Waquoit Bay and other estuaries around here. And then that brown mat on the beach is dried up with off rock. I can't even sample this. I have to come back after a north wind blows it off the beach. So it can really preclude me from doing my work. You know, it's you just can't get the net hauled onto the beach appropriately to retain the catch when you have that. So we come back later on. But that actually has happened 5 times, and I'm going on my 11th sample year. So about 50% of the time that beach is moving just right across the way. It's coming with this. It's just the predominant wind direction of driving along the shore. But there's a lot of it out there. You see a lot of it on Washington too. I hate to say it seems like it's been getting more frequent. It's hard to measure. I don't have the time to quantify that, unfortunately, but I wish I did. But it does seem to be happening more often. They would probably make it though, if you wanted to. If you wanted to put them back, he'd make it more. They're big enough.
I only think what I get into that.
Yeah, but there's no shortage, I think, of ocean drinks. There's a lot of them out there. And then this is just H0 winter flounder in the same survey. So over time you can see it's a number of fish per square meter that we produce, and that recruitment has gone down quite a bit. Although when you hit 2010, when the moratorium went in, we had a couple of events during the moratorium that went above the median recruitment. So I see that as a glimmer of hope. You know, you let some of those large fish stay out there and do their thing, even though there's not that many of them. They do lay an awful lot of eggs. So I'm an optimist, and I think there's a possibility that you can nurse a population like this back to health, even though it's at less than a third of what it was before. It's only 10%, about 10% of what it was, but and that's what we know. It's probably actually a lot lower than that. And then this is just a look at the individual estuaries over time, and you can see Waquoit Bay really captures the overall trend. There are some estuaries that have more noise from year to year, and they tend to be the smaller systems or systems where tidal amplitude is a little bit higher. I think our sampling strategy is really good in the estuaries of Nantucket Sound that have very low tidal amplitude. What you get when you get estuaries that have a greater tidal amplitude above 4 feet is I think the fish don't go into tidal as much. And I've done some work north of the Cape looking at that, and it definitely rings true up there with the tide being over 8 feet. You get almost no winter flounder underneath the tidal up there. It's mostly a subtidal thing and structured habitat, eelgrass and edge, mussel beds, shell beds, even more important there because they are subtidal. They're not coming up as deep as that. So the whole end product that we always have been shooting towards is bettering the management of the species and getting more information that's critical to this, not just the population index that we produce, but this life history data that has been gathered over the last 50 years. So that's been sort of the goal all along, and we're going to keep at it, even under management decisions that you might not be happy with. We're going to keep going anyway, and the data really just speaks for itself. So I just want to thank all of my predecessors and my current co-workers. This is the team that we have right now, and I'd like to open it up to questions.